Let me hit you with a wild fact. If you opened 2 booster boxes of base set back in the day, you could practically complete the whole holo set, minus the first edition Machamp, which was only available in the 2-player starter deck. But we're talking the Charizard, the Blastoise, the works. But 2 booster boxes of an EX era set, you'd be lucky to pull even 1 Gold Star Pokemon card. That's right, Gold Stars are so rare you could open dozens of boxes and still not complete the set. They weren't just hard to pull, they were legendary. So what makes them so special, and why are collectors still obsessed with them today? And more importantly, how are they performing in today's bull market? That's what we're going to break down here today, and I invite you to join me. I'm Pokemon Classics, let's roll the intro. Gold Star Pokemon cards first appeared in the EX Team Rocket Return set in 2004 and ran until EX Power Keepers in 2007. During this time, the Pokemon TCG was struggling with a drop in popularity after the initial boom of the late 90s wore off. As a result, print runs were significantly smaller and cards were no longer as accessible or as celebrated as they had been just years earlier. To further complicate matters, this was also shortly after Nintendo took over the licensing and distribution of the Pokemon trading card game in 2003, making this era of Pokemon one of the darkest and most turbulent in its nearly 30-year history. However, these struggles may have spawned one of the most important decisions in Pokemon TCG history, the introduction of a new rarity tier called Gold Stars. These cards were designed to reignite interest, and boy did they succeed. Similar to the Shining cards of Neo Revelation and Neo Destiny, Gold Stars were ultra rares, but this time bearing a holographic star rarity rather than the triple star rarity seen earlier. However, these Gold Star cards were brutal in comparison. Just how tough were they to collect? Well, consider this. The Shining cards of Neo Revelation and Neo Destiny are estimated to have pull rates of 2 and 3 per box respectively. In theory, it would take 1 or 2 boxes of Neo Revelation to catch both the Shining Magikarp and the Shining Gyarados, and approximately 3 to 4 boxes of Neo Destiny to assemble all 8 Shining cards. And that's a best case scenario, assuming you don't pull too many duplicates. Gold Stars, on the other hand, have estimated pull rates of 1 in every 2 boxes. That's 1 for every 72 packs. And considering the full set features 27 cards distributed across 10 different sets, during a period of Pokemon's smallest print runs, well, you can see why these cards are so desirable and so expensive. Just doing some quick math, it would take at least 50 boxes to collect the first 25 Gold Star cards, and about 80 Pop Series 5 packs to land the Espeon and the Umbreon. It's not just rarity though, Gold Stars also broke barriers for game design and card art. Literally speaking, Gold Star cards are notable for their character artwork escaping their illustration boxes, a gimmick that Pokemon would build upon leading up to the full art designs that are commonplace today. You know, I wonder if cards of today look back at these earlier designs like primitive ancestors. Anyway, this was completely unheard of at the time, and a unique piece of history giving collectors something extra to chase. The Gold Star cards also feature the now iconic Gold Star next to the Pokemon name, and a holographic drop shadow, giving the cards a hollow bleed visual effect. And another interesting fact is that the Gold Star cards were also illustrated as Shining Pokemon, with alternating colors long before shiny hunting was a mainstream game mechanic. 3 of these cards, Gyarados, Charizard, and Mew, were also designed as Delta species, which was another new design element of the time, giving Pokemon entirely new typing. Finally, Gold Star Pokemon also broke traditional evolutionary rules and were playable as basic Pokemon. But just like the Shining Pokemon from the Neo sets, you could only have 1 Gold Star per deck. The Shining Pokemon were pretty worthless considering their, let's say, unique energy requirements, but several Gold Star cards were successful in competitive play, and a few have even been reprinted in World Championship decks, including the Latias in 2006, the Jolteon in 2007, and the Mew in 2008. With so much historical significance and organic rarity to back it up, it's no surprise that these cards have performed so well over the years. In fact, that's where I wanted to turn our attention to next, is to examine the changing market values and populations for each of these 27 cards over time, and we'll start with the first 3 released in Team Rocket Returns back in 2004. Now, appropriately, the very first 3 Gold Star cards were given to the 3 starters of Generation 3, the Hoenn region. That includes Torchic, Mudkip, and Treecko. And interestingly, out of the entire Gold Star set, Torchic is the lowest population card in PSA 10 with just 19 copies. Now, there hasn't been a PSA 10 sold this year, but the most recent copy I could find was sold on June 16th, 2024 on Fanatics for $38,400, coming close to eclipsing the all-time record sale of $43,200 sold in 2022. Now, a couple other notable sales that I wanted to highlight was a Mudkip PSA 9 that sold for a record $7,000 on ZNG auctions on eBay on June 3rd, 2025. Then a Treecko in PSA 10 also recently sold for a record price of $11,900 on May 2nd, 2025. Now, a box for Team Rocket Returns is incredibly expensive, and the last sale I could find for a box is $31,200. This was on May 4th of 2023. So it'd be interesting to see how this box is performing now that we're in a bull market. Speaking of expensive boxes, the EX Deoxys box recently sold on Rare Candy for $41,004 on May 29th, 2024. And that's a high price tag, but it makes sense because this box could contain one of the 3 most desirable Gold Stars, Latias, Latios, or Rayquaza. Now, a couple key sales for you. There was a Latios PSA 10 that sold for $17,499 on April 7th of this year in 2025, and that's just a bit below the record price of $20,099 in 2023. Now, the last sold Rayquaza 10 was all the way back in August of 2023, and that one sold for $39,600, and that's the most recent sale that I could find. However, there were some previous sales for this card that were over $40,000, so we're getting close to hitting that all-time high for Rayquaza. The Latios PSA 9 did sell for a record price recently on April 19th, 2025. This was a ZNG auction, and this one sold for $7,000. Finally, I wanted to highlight the fact that there's been no PSA 9 Latias or Rayquaza sales here in 2025, but there was a Rayquaza PSA 8 that sold on June 11th of this year for $12,100 on a Probstein auction, which is pretty wild when you think about a PSA 8. Next, we have the 3 legendary beasts, and those can be found in EX Unseen Forces, the last box of which I found sold for $19,003 on Rare Candy's platform in April of 2024. Now, one thing I'll note is that these have by far the highest populations of any Gold Star cards, and that's due to allegations that a bunch of these cards were stolen or leaked from the factory before entering circulation. Anyway, the Suicune PSA 10 seems to be the most expensive of them, and there was a sale recently for $3,750 on June 11th. The Raikou 9 also seems to be the most expensive of the 9s currently, and this one sold for a record $1,005 recently, which is just a little bit above the other 2. Of the 3 legendary beasts, personally, I like the Raikou the best, but that's just me. Set number 4 of the Gold Star era was EX Delta Species, and there was another box for sale on Rare Candy on April of 2024 for $20,094. Now, of the 3 Gold Star cards you could theoretically pull, the Metagross is the most expensive one, and recently there was a sale on Fanatics on May 28th, 2025 for a record-setting $15,000. Now, I don't know if this one was paid for or not, but there was a sale last fall of 2024 for $8,100, so I'll let you guys decide. The Groudon 10 also sold as an eBay buy it now for $11,499, and that was in May of 2025. And a Kyogre 10 sold for $6,200, also in May of this year. Finally, I wanted to highlight the Metagross PSA 9 sale, and this one sold for $5,100 on June 8th, 2025. So if that's the PSA 9 price, maybe it adds some legitimacy to the PSA 10 being $8,000, or potentially that $15,000 price tag that we saw in Fanatics. Our next 3 Gold Star cards come from EX Legend Maker, and these are the Regis. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of these Pokemon, and they do seem to be some of the least expensive Gold Star cards currently in circulation. But of the 3, Regice seems to be the most expensive in PSA 10, and that does make sense given its lower population. It's interesting to note that a PSA 10 Regice recently sold for $7,000 on Fanatics on May 26th, 2025, and this is exactly 10 times the price that the card was going for just 5 years earlier in 2020. Now, there were no sales for a PSA 10 Reggie Steele, so I'd be interesting to see where that card currently stands here in 2025. And then the last thing that I wanted to note is that all three PSA 9s have recently achieved all-time highs, just between that $1,500 and $2,000 mark. Now, set number 6, EX Crystal Guardians, is an interesting one because this is the first set that only featured 2 Gold Star cards, the Celebi and the Alakazam. And personally, the Alakazam, one of my all-time favorites. Anyway, both of these have recently sold in PSA 10 at all-time record highs. An Alakazam, with a population of just 82, sold for $8,100 on eBay on April 6th, 2025. Meanwhile, the Celebi, which has a slightly higher population of 102, also sold on eBay for $5,100 just 1 week later on April 13th, 2025. It's also worth noting that both PSA 9 prices have also peaked to record highs here in 2025. So the Gold Stars from Crystal Guardians doing pretty well. Returning to 3 Gold Star cards released in a set is EX Holland Phantoms, and this is often referred to as the most expensive EX era box at $45,225. That was a recent sale on Golden Auctions on May 3rd, 2025. It's an expensive booster box. Interestingly, there's been no Gyarados sales here in 2025, and this card has a surprisingly low population of just 37 when compared to the other two that are both over 100. Now, the last sold price I could find was from November of 2024, and that one sold for $18,000. Pretty expensive. Meanwhile, the Mewtwo sold on a ZNG auction for $11,100 on April 6, 2025, and that was a record price for Mewtwo, and the Pikachu was almost a record price, just off by $100. But the Pikachu sold on Fanatics for $15,000 on May 4th, 2025. Previously, the all-time high was $15,100, and that's going all the way back to July of 2021. Clearly, though, these are some of the most desirable Gold Star cards, and how can you not love them? These are some beautiful illustrations. Now, for whatever reason, Pokemon decided to do 2 Gold Star cards in Dragon Frontiers, and one of them isn't even a dragon. I guess technically neither of them are dragons, but I digress. EX Dragon Frontiers recently had a booster box sell last year in May of 2024 for $31,003. And here are a couple recent PSA 10 prices that just dropped. The Charizard sold on ZNG auctions on eBay for $40,000 just a couple weeks ago on June 1st. Now, as you can see from this chart, the record price for Charizard goes all the way back to 2020 when it sold for $60,000. So this card still has some ground to make up. The Mew, on the other hand, sold for a record price of $15,000 on a ZNG auction on eBay on May 4th, 2025. And both PSA 9 copies have also sold at record highs here just this year. One of the other interesting things to note is looking at all 4 copies of this card in PSA 9, PSA 10, every single one of them have achieved between 5 and 8 times increase in their value since 2020. That's a pretty good return. The final Gold Stars in this set are all Evolutions, and the first 3 are Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. Now, Vaporeon is the most expensive one, and there was a Fanatics sale for $8,500 recently, and this is kind of strange because it's actually the highest population of the 3 cards. Now, Flareon 10 sold for $5,752 on a ZNG auction on May 18th, 2025. A Jolteon in that same auction sold for $5,301. There's also a Vaporeon as part of that ZNG auction for $6,250. So even if we take that lower price point, Vaporeon is still leaving the other ones in the dust. Interestingly, talking about Vaporeon, it's the only one that hasn't had a PSA 9 sell here in 2025. But I'd have to think that this card would at least track with the other 2 in that $2,000 plus range. And I'll go ahead and weigh in with my opinion again. Of the 3, I like the Jolteon the best. But the Evolutions that I love more than the Jolteon are the Espeon and the Umbreon, and they are the final 2 Gold Star cards on the list. Now, these ones are a little bit unique because the only way you could acquire these is pulling them from the Pop Series 5 promo packs, and those packs sell for about $600 to $700 per pack. It's been estimated that there's only about 1 in every 40 packs, making it a very difficult and expensive pull. Now, the Espeon recently sold in a PSA 10 for $15,450, and this was part of a ZNG auction on May 11th, 2025. There have been some higher historical sales though, some of which have achieved over $18,000. Now the Umbreon is a difficult one. I did find a record of a private sale for an Umbreon that I simply can't confirm, but it was listed at $40,000 by Gempire Cards in May of 2025. Otherwise, the last public auction I could find was on October of 2024 on Fanatics, and this one sold for $22,800. Interestingly, testing the popularity of these two, there's also no PSA 9 sales for the year. The last PSA 9 Umbreon sold for $8,100 on Fanatics on July 14th of 2024. However, I will add this, there was a PSA 8 Umbreon that sold on ZNG auction for $9,877, and that was just a few days ago on June 8th, 2025. So I don't think it's unrealistic to expect this card to be selling for significantly more in a PSA 9 and a PSA 10, especially considering it's an Umbreon. Now, are gold stars for everyone? Probably not, and that's okay. They're expensive, they're rare, and for many, they're grail cards you work towards over time. But if you're serious about collecting and you value history, rarity, and prestige, gold stars have proven to be some of the best long-term holds in the Pokemon TCG. Even owning one in any condition feels special. So, that's the story of Gold Star Pokemon cards, from their historic launch in the EX era to their unmatched rarity and rising values of today. They're not just cards, they're icons of Pokemon history. And with that, I turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on Gold Star cards, and are they overvalued by collectors or worthy of recognition and value that they're currently achieving? Also, for those of you that are chasing after Gold Stars, which one is your personal favorite, or which one is the most difficult one to acquire? Let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you all that the classics never go out of style. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you all with the next video. Till then, bye everybody.